Picture this. It's 2 a.m. You're lying on your kitchen floor. You reached for a glass of water, your foot slipped on the tile, and down you went. You're not badly hurt, just shaken, but you cannot get up on your own. And there is absolutely no one in the house. How long would it take before someone noticed you were missing? For millions of American women over 70, that question isn't hypothetical. It's a quiet fear they carry every single day, often without telling a soul. Society tells us that aging in place is the gold standard, that staying in our own home, handling our own affairs, needing nobody, is something to be proud of. Independence, we're told, equals strength. But what if that story is killing us? I want to introduce you to Florence, who is 81 years old and absolutely thriving. She hosts a weekly dinner party, travels several times a year, and her doctor recently told her she has the cardiovascular profile of a woman 20 years younger. Florence is sharp, funny, and full of plans. She also hasn't lived alone in over a decade, and she believes that decision is the single most important one she ever made for her health. Over the course of her 70s, Florence tried 4 completely different living situations. She kept notes. She paid attention to how her body felt, how well she slept, how often she got sick. What she discovered lines up almost perfectly with what researchers at Harvard, UCLA, and the National Institute on Aging have been quietly documenting for years. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what the science says about living arrangements and longevity, and you'll have a clear, practical way to figure out which option is right for you. Stay with me, because the answer may genuinely surprise you. The silent epidemic nobody is talking about. Before we get into the solutions, we need to be honest about the problem, because most of us are underestimating how serious it is. Have you felt this creeping loneliness in your own life? Share your experience in the comments. You're not alone in this struggle. Loneliness among older adults is not just an emotional discomfort, it is a full-blown medical crisis. The former U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, formally classified chronic loneliness as a public health emergency, stating that its effects on the body are roughly equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, not 1 or 2, 15. For women over 65 who live alone, the numbers are sobering. Research consistently shows a 50% higher likelihood of developing dementia, a significantly elevated risk of heart disease, and measurably faster immune system decline compared to women who maintain strong social connections. These are not small differences. These are the kinds of numbers that reshape life expectancy. Florence experienced this in her own body before she understood what was happening. After her husband passed when she was 70, she was determined to manage on her own. She kept her house spotless, paid her bills on time, drove herself to appointments. By every external measure, she was doing fine. But inside, her blood pressure crept upward. Sleep became elusive. She'd find herself talking to grocery store clerks at unusual length, not because she needed help finding anything, just to hear another voice. She started leaving the television on around the clock. I thought I was living independently, she says now. What I was actually doing was disappearing. The turning point came during a 3-day power outage. Sitting alone in the dark, it struck her. If something serious happened to her, how long before anyone would realize it? Days, maybe longer. She decided that afternoon to stop accepting loneliness as an inevitable part of getting older and to start experimenting with something better.
Experiment 1. Moving in with family. Florence's first instinct was the same one most of us would have: move in with her daughter. Her daughter Sarah had been gently suggesting it for months, and her son-in-law had already converted their basement into a cozy apartment with a separate entrance. On paper, it was ideal. Built-in company, built-in safety net, family close by. Sarah was genuinely excited. Florence told herself this was exactly what she needed. And for a little while, it was. Florence felt useful helping around the house. She loved having meals together. Watching her teenage granddaughter grow up was a genuine gift. But 3 months in, something started to shift. The problems weren't dramatic. There were no big blow-ups, no moments of crisis. Instead, it was a slow accumulation of small frictions. Florence would want a quiet evening alone and feel guilty for skipping family dinner. Sarah, with the best of intentions, started making small decisions for her mother, which doctor to see, which event to attend, without really asking. Florence's granddaughter, initially warm and welcoming, began to feel her privacy was being encroached upon. These are normal, human reactions. Nobody was doing anything wrong, but the dynamic was quietly suffocating everyone. The breaking point came over something as mundane as money. Florence wanted to contribute to household expenses. Sarah insisted it wasn't necessary. What should have been a warm and generous exchange became a weeks-long source of tension. Florence feeling like a dependent, Sarah feeling unappreciated, both of them tiptoeing around the subject. Florence made the hard choice to move out after 6 months. She does not regret it. "It wasn't a failure," she says firmly. "It was information. I learned exactly what I needed, and what I needed was connection without losing myself in the process." This tracks with data from AARP, which found that the majority of multi-generational living arrangements encounter significant friction within the first year, not because families don't love each other, but because combining households requires careful planning, clear conversations about roles and expectations, and genuine respect for each person's autonomy. When those foundations are solid, multi-generational living can be wonderful. When they're skipped over in the rush to solve an immediate problem, the arrangement tends to crack. If you're considering moving in with family, have honest conversations before anything is decided. Talk about finances, privacy, daily routines, decision-making authority, and, crucially, what the plan looks like if the arrangement stops working for anyone. Agreements made out of love are still agreements.
Experiment 2. The senior roommate. After leaving her daughter's home, Florence was in unfamiliar territory. She didn't want to live alone, but she wasn't ready to give up her independence. Then a friend suggested something she'd never considered: finding a senior roommate. "I thought my roommate days were behind me at 40, Florence laughs. But when you're open to it, the idea makes a lot of sense. Through her local senior center, Florence was connected with Dorothy, a 68-year-old recently divorced retired teacher who was navigating the same crossroads. Before either of them signed anything, they spent weeks getting to know each other properly. They met for coffee. They talked through sleep habits, cleaning standards, how they felt about guests, what quiet time meant to each of them, their politics, their values, their pet peeves. They even created what Florence jokingly calls a compatibility questionnaire, a list of questions designed to surface potential incompatibilities before they became problems. It was more thorough than any roommate search either of them had done in college. What they found was a surprising fit. Dorothy was an early riser who loved gardening in the mornings. Florence stayed up late with a book. Rather than clashing, their rhythms complemented each other. Dorothy took charge of the morning kitchen, Florence made dinner. They split expenses and found that both of them were measurably more financially comfortable as a result. More than the practical benefits, though, was what Florence calls the background safety. She no longer worried about falling and not being found. She didn't feel the ambient anxiety of being utterly alone in a house that had grown too quiet. But she also retained her own room, her own schedule, her own life. "Dorothy and I weren't joined at the hip," Florence explains. "Some evenings we'd watch a movie together. Others we'd each do our own thing and barely cross paths. But she was there. That mattered more than I can fully explain." The arrangement lasted 2 years, until Dorothy relocated to be near her grandchildren. Florence described that period as among the happiest of her adult life, not despite the compromise of sharing space, but because of what sharing space gave her. Research from shared housing programs confirms what Florence experienced. Senior roommate arrangements have a high success rate when participants invest time in the screening process and establish clear written agreements about finances, household responsibilities, and social expectations. The key isn't compatibility on every point, it's mutual respect and clear communication before problems arise. Practical tip: if you're exploring this option, look into formal senior home share programs in your area. Many communities offer free matching services with structured screening tools. Going through a program rather than just asking around significantly increases the likelihood of a good match. Experiment 3: Intentional Senior Communities. For her third experiment, Florence ventured into territory she hadn't known existed: co-housing communities designed specifically for adults who want to age actively and independently together. When someone said senior community, I pictured institutional hallways and shuffleboard tournaments, she admits. I had no idea what was actually out there. Co-housing is a model in which residents own or rent their own fully private homes or apartments, but share common spaces, a dining room, garden, workshop, lounge, and organize their social lives with an intentional structure. Decisions are made collectively. Meals are sometimes communal, sometimes not. Residents look out for each other without anyone being responsible for caring for anyone else. Florence spent 4 months in a trial residency at a co-housing community, many of them offer this, and was struck by the level of purpose and engagement she witnessed. Residents ran committees, organized events, welcomed newcomers. The community had informal systems. Someone who was good with technology helped those who weren't. Someone with a car gave rides. Someone with a green thumb managed the shared garden. It wasn't charity, it was mutualism. I felt useful in a way I hadn't since I'd retired, Florence says. Not like someone's burden, like a contributing member of something real. She also explored other emerging models: eco-villages, active adult communities organized around shared values, and intergenerational home share programs where older adults with extra space welcome younger people, often grad students or young professionals, in exchange for help around the house and the simple gift of company. Ultimately, co-housing wasn't Florence's permanent answer. She found the structure somewhat constraining. She wanted connection, but on her own schedule. But the experience reshaped her thinking about what was possible. I stopped believing that my only 2 options were alone or with family, she says. That shift was everything. Research from the Co-Housing Association of the United States shows that residents in intentional communities consistently report higher life satisfaction, stronger social bonds, and significantly lower healthcare utilization than comparable peers in conventional housing. These aren't small effects. They represent genuine differences in how people age. Experiment 4: Chosen Family Clustering. Florence's 4th and final experiment wasn't a formal living arrangement at all. It was something she designed herself, drawing on everything the previous years had taught her. She calls it chosen family clustering, and it may be the most practical, scalable model in this entire video. What does chosen family mean to you? Share your thoughts about creating intentional relationships in the comments below. Here's what she did. Florence moved into one unit of a duplex in a walkable neighborhood and persuaded her longtime friend Martha to take the other unit. They maintained entirely separate households, separate leases, separate kitchens, separate social lives, but they were 30 feet apart. If something went wrong, someone would know. Then Florence reached out to 6 other women she knew who were also living alone. Some were widows, some were divorced, some had simply never married. She proposed something simple: a weekly dinner rotating among their homes, a group text for daily check-ins, a loose commitment to look out for each other. They called themselves the Village.
5 years later, the village is the centerpiece of Florence's life. They drive each other to appointments, they coordinate grocery runs, they've traveled together, they've sat with each other through cancer diagnoses, family estrangements, and the loss of people they loved. When one member moved away, 2 others joined. The group has evolved, but the commitment to each other has held. We are each other's emergency contacts, Florence says. We are each other's adventure partners. We are chosen family in the truest sense, people who decided to love each other on purpose. What makes this model so powerful is exactly what makes it so different from the alternatives. There are no formal obligations, no institutional rules, no shared walls or finances that could become sources of friction. The village operates entirely on mutual benefit and genuine care. Members can engage as much or as little as they wish, but everyone knows that support is available when they need it. And the health outcomes reflect it. Florence's blood pressure is normal. Her sleep is consistently good. She hasn't been hospitalized in 5 years. She is taking fewer medications at 92 than she was at 80. Her physician calls her his model patient. The science behind Florence's village is extensive. Harvard's multi-decade study of adult development found that the quality of social relationships is the single strongest predictor of both happiness and longevity, outranking genetics, diet, exercise, and wealth. The Blue Zones research, which examined communities around the world with the highest concentrations of people over 100, found that intentional social networks are universal among those populations. In Okinawa, Japan, these networks are formalized into groups called moai, chosen circles of friends who support each other across a lifetime. Researchers credit them as a significant contributor to Okinawan longevity. UCLA neuroscience research adds another layer. Social isolation activates the same regions of the brain as physical pain. Genuine connection, conversely, triggers the brain's reward systems, releasing oxytocin and serotonin that reduce inflammation, lower cortisol, and reinforce the body's resilience. Strong social bonds don't just feel good, they literally change the body's chemistry in ways that slow aging.
How to figure out what's right for you. Florence's journey is inspiring, but it's also intensely personal. What worked for her may not be the right answer for you, and that's exactly the point. The goal isn't to copy her choices. It's to make your own, with intention. She developed a simple 5-question framework to help people figure out where to start. Question 1. How independent are you right now? Think about your physical health, your finances, and your emotional self-sufficiency. If you're in good health, financially stable, and feel grounded in yourself, you have more flexibility. If you're managing significant health challenges or financial stress, you may need arrangements with stronger built-in support structures. Question 2. What's your social energy like? Some people are genuinely energized by frequent, unplanned interaction. Others prefer connection in regular but more controlled doses. And some of us need a lot of quiet time with occasional meaningful company. None of these is better or worse, but knowing which one describes you matters enormously. Co-housing communities tend to suit high social energy people. The village model works beautifully for moderate social energy. Roommate arrangements or nearby family setups may work well for those who are more introverted. Question 3. What are your non-negotiables? Florence's list included her own private space, the ability to make her own decisions, financial independence, regular social contact, and access to emergency support. Your list might look completely different. Write yours down, then use it to evaluate your options. An arrangement that hits 4 out of 5 may be worth exploring. One that violates 3 of them probably isn't the right fit, no matter how convenient it looks on paper. Question 4. How comfortable are you with change? Some of us adapt to new situations easily. Others need stability and familiarity. Honest self-assessment here saves a lot of heartache. If you are risk-averse, start small.
Try a weekly dinner group before committing to a home share. Visit a co-housing community before applying for residency. Experiments are allowed. Nothing has to be permanent on the first try. Question 5. How do you want to spend this chapter of your life? This is the deepest question and the most important. If you want to be deeply embedded in your family's daily life, multi-generational living may be exactly right, as long as the planning and communication are solid. If you want adventure, growth, and new experiences, intentional communities or a chosen family model might energize you in ways you haven't felt in years. If you're not sure, that's fine too. Start by answering a simpler version. What did you love doing 10 years ago that you've stopped doing? Who did you feel most alive around? Let those answers point you somewhere.
Where to start today? You don't need to overhaul your life this week. Florence didn't. Her village started as a single dinner invitation to a few women she already knew. Here are 4 things you can do right now, no matter where you're starting from. Call one person. Think of someone you haven't spoken to in a while. A neighbor, an old colleague, a friend from church or a club, and reach out, not to solve anything, just to reconnect. Identify your village candidates. Make a mental list of the people already in your life who share your values and who you genuinely enjoy. These are your raw materials. You don't need to build a formal group. You just need to start nurturing those relationships with more intention. Research what's available in your area. Look up senior home share programs, co-housing communities, and senior centers near you. Many senior centers offer informal social groups that function a lot like Florence's village without requiring any formal commitment. Have the honest conversation. If family living is on the table, sit down with the people involved and work through the real questions: finances, privacy, expectations, the "what if this doesn't work" plan before any boxes get packed. Her path from grieving widow to vibrant, connected, thriving 81-year-old wasn't a straight line. It took 4 experiments, 2 years of a roommate arrangement that taught her to share space gracefully, 4 months in a co-housing community that showed her what was possible, and 5 years of building a chosen family that has become the great joy of her later life. The lesson she most wants to share isn't about which arrangement to choose. It's something more fundamental. The belief that you get to decide how this chapter goes. Aging alone isn't independence, it's just alone. And the women who are living the longest, happiest, most vibrant lives past 70 aren't the ones who needed nobody. They're the ones who figured out how to need the right people and how to be needed in return. If Florence's story resonated with you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below. We'd love to know. What does your ideal living arrangement look like? What's standing in the way of creating it? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. The steps you take today can shape your independence tomorrow. Stay healthy and peaceful.